You have come here because something in you is tired of giving. You have given your heart to people who never learned to hold it gently, your time to situations that drained your essence, your compassion to those who mistook it for weakness. Yet even as you stand in exhaustion, you sense there is something sacred in your sensitivity, a divine thread that connects you to the unseen depths of human suffering. You are an empath, and that word has become both your crown and your cross. But what if I told you that your compassion, when unconscious, can become an instrument of self-betrayal? That to truly love another, you must first travel through the labyrinth of your own shadow, the hidden realm of unlived life that governs your compulsions to rescue, to please, to absorb, and to suffer for others. The shadow is not evil, it is merely forgotten. It is the reservoir of all that you have denied in yourself in order to be loved. For the empath, this often means the denial of anger, boundaries, selfishness, and power. You were taught early that love means self-erasure. Perhaps your parents' pain became your mission field. Perhaps their silence taught you to listen so deeply that you disappeared. The child who learned to sense danger before it arrived grew into the adult who feels every vibration in the room and yet cannot locate their own pulse. To do shadow work is to reclaim that pulse. It is to walk into the cave where the rejected emotions dwell and to say, I will no longer fear you. I will no longer exile you in the name of goodness. The empath's healing does not come from closing the heart, but from descending with awareness into the underworld of feeling where the heart was first split open. Imagine a mirror that reflects not your face but your forgotten power. That mirror is your shadow. When you look into it, you will not see demons. You will see the parts of you that have been begging to be felt, the rage that once protected you, the desire that once gave you direction, the loneliness that once sought connection. All these are not enemies but guardians. The world praises empathy, yet fears intensity. But empathy without boundaries is possession. It is the unconscious merging of your soul with the pain of another until you can no longer distinguish who is suffering. This is what I called participation mystique, the primitive fusion of identities that occurs when consciousness is not yet individuated. The empath, without shadow work, lives in this fusion perpetually, mistaking absorption for love. You see, the psyche seeks wholeness, not comfort. The task of individuation is to bring light to the unconscious, to integrate the shadow, to balance the opposites within. For the empath, the shadow often carries the archetype of the warrior, the one who says no, who defends the sacred boundaries of the soul. Until that archetype is integrated, the empath remains half alive, a saint on the surface, a ghost underneath. When you overgive, you are not being virtuous. You are trying to redeem your own rejected self through others. You rescue because you have not yet rescued the abandoned child within. You absorb pain because you fear your own. Every act of unconscious compassion is an attempt to complete an unfinished inner story. Let me tell you a dream. A woman walks into a dim cathedral carrying a bowl of water. She intends to baptize others, but the bowl has a crack and the water leaks with every step. She kneels before the altar and weeps, saying, "I cannot save them. My bowl is broken." A voice echoes from above, "Child, the bowl was never meant for others. It was meant to heal your own thirst." No, this is the dream of the empath. The cracked bowl is the soul that gives without receiving. Shadow work begins when you stop asking how to fix others and begin to ask, what in me is still leaking? The first descent into the shadow is always disorienting. The empath feels guilt for turning inward, shame for setting boundaries, fear of being called selfish. But remember, guilt is the voice of the old conditioning, not of the soul. The soul celebrates every act of self-reclamation. It knows that boundaries are not walls, but channels through which authentic love can flow. In the unconscious lives, the archetype of the healer, but it is always paired with the wounded one. You cannot heal what you have not suffered. Yet, if you refuse to integrate your own wound, you will project it onto others, perpetually trying to heal them so you can avoid confronting yourself. Shadow work unites the healer and the wounded into one whole being who no longer heals to escape pain, but loves because they have befriended it. To end emotional overgiving, you must learn to sit in the silence that follows, saying no. In that silence, you will meet the parts of you that believed love would vanish. If you stopped giving, you will tremble, you may even cry. But if you stay with it, you will feel a new current, rising a quiet power that says, I am not responsible for everyone's happiness. I am responsible for my soul. The shadow speaks through projection. Every person who drains you is a mirror showing where your boundaries leak. Every situation that exhausts you reveals an unhealed pattern of self-sacrifice. The moment you withdraw projection, you reclaim energy. You realize that others are not stealing your light. You are offering it unconsciously, hoping to be seen. Empathy, when purified by awareness, becomes compassion without attachment. It no longer says, I will suffer with you, but I will see your suffering clearly and hold it in the light of consciousness. That light heals without depletion because it flows from wholeness, not from lack. Many of you fear that integrating the shadow will make you cold or detached. But the opposite is true. Only when you know the depths of your darkness can your love become radiant and real. A love born from repression is pity. A love born from integration is presence. Think of the moon. It reflects the sun's light, yet is bound to darkness. The empath must become like the moon shining, yes, but rooted in shadow. The light is not yours to hoard. It passes through you when you are transparent to both joy and sorrow. You will notice that as you practice this awareness, the world begins to shift. Relationships built on dependency will dissolve. People who once demanded your energy will drift away. You may feel loneliness, but it is the loneliness of liberation. Out of this emptiness, arises your authentic self, the one who no longer gives to be needed, but gives because they are full. And so, my friends, shadow work for the empath is not an exercise in self-protection, but in self-realization. It is the alchemical marriage of compassion and power, of feeling and discernment. It is the end of emotional overgiving and the beginning of sacred sovereignty. When you begin to face your shadow, the unconscious responds with images, symbols, and dreams that seek to guide you through the labyrinth. The soul always speaks in the language of metaphor, for it is older than words. The empath's dreams often overflow with water floods, drowning, leaking vessels, for water is the symbol of feeling, of the unconscious tides that the empath has long tried to contain. To dream of drowning is not a warning of death, but a plea from the psyche. Stop trying to stay above the surface. Let yourself feel what you have carried for everyone else. Shadow work begins not in the mind, but in the body. Every overgiver has a tense chest, a tight stomach, a throat that knows the word no, but has forgotten how to release it. The shadow resides in these forgotten muscles, in the sighs that were swallowed, in the tears, never allowed to fall. To bring awareness into these spaces is to reawaken your original aliveness. The body remembers what the mind denies. The empath's gift is sensitivity. The empath's curse is absorption. You feel another's sorrow as if it were your own, and this blurring of boundaries once made you feel connected, but over time it became a slow erosion of the self. You began to call exhaustion compassion, anxiety, intuition, and guilt love. Yet beneath all that confusion lies a truth the shadow guards fiercely. You have the right to exist separately. The unconscious does not wish to destroy your empathy. It wants to transform it into consciousness. True empathy is not identification. It is awareness. To identify with another's pain is to lose yourself. To be aware of their pain is to hold space without merging. When the empath withdraws projection, they cease to live as the world's emotional sponge and become instead a mirror of clarity. I recall a patient who once told me, "Doctor, I love too much. I see their pain before they do. I can't help but fix it." I asked her to close her eyes and imagine that pain as a figure before her. She saw a small, wounded animal trembling in the snow. I asked, "Whose pain is this?" She said. "Theirs." I replied, "Touch it and see." When she reached out, the animal looked up with her own eyes. This is the revelation of the empath's shadow. What you call theirs is often your own reflection. In the ancient myths, the healer who ignores their wound becomes a tyrant of compassion, offering help to others as a way to avoid confronting their own suffering. The archetype of the wounded healer teaches that only by embracing one's own pain can one offer genuine healing. The empath's path, therefore, is not to stop feeling, but to discern whose pain they are feeling and why. The emotional overgiver lives in an unconscious covenant. If I can absorb their pain, Maybe I will finally be loved. This is the original contract of the child who mistook emotional labor for safety. You learned that love must be earned by caretaking, and so, as an adult, every time you sense another's distress, the old pattern awakens an ancient reflex of the soul that whispers, "If I can make them happy, I will be safe again." But shadow work exposes the lie within that contract. Safety cannot be found in control. Love cannot be earned through depletion. The unconscious will continue to send you people who mirror this wound until you withdraw the projection and reclaim your own power. That is why the empath relationships often repeat the same pattern of giving too much, receiving too little, and feeling invisible. These repetitions are not punishments. They are mirrors crafted by the psyche to reveal what still seeks integration. To integrate the shadow is to look into these mirrors without judgment. It is to see the manipulative friend and realize how they embody your disowned assertiveness. It is to see the narcissist and recognize how they mirror your unclaimed ego. It is to see the victim and sense your own fear of power. The outer world becomes a theater of the unconscious, each character playing a role that points you back to yourself. But beware, the ego resists this seeing. It would rather remain a martyr than admit it has been feeding on its own virtue. For there is a hidden pride in overgiving the pride of being needed, of being the good one, of being indispensable. This is why shadow work requires courage. It dismantles the self-image you built to survive. You will meet the part of you that enjoys being the savior. You will meet the secret satisfaction that comes from being the one who gives more. And when you face that, you will understand the paradox. Humility begins where false goodness ends. In the language of alchemy, this stage is called nigredo, the blackening, where all the illusions of purity dissolve. The empath in shadow work must allow their inner image of the saint to die. Only through this symbolic death can a more authentic compassion be reborn, one that no longer fears rejection or demands approval. When you begin to reclaim the shadow, you will feel both grief and liberation. Grief for the years you gave away your light, and liberation for the power returning to your hands. That power will frighten you at first, for you have been taught that power corrupts, but true power, the power of consciousness, does not dominate. It creates space. It allows you to love without losing yourself. Let me tell you another dream. A man walks through a forest at dusk, carrying a lantern. The flame flickers with every gust of wind. Suddenly, he sees a dark figure approach, identical to himself, but with eyes like burning coals. Terrified, he raises the lantern, but the light goes out. The shadow figure steps closer and whispers, "I am not your enemy. I am your energy." The man trembles and lowers the lantern. In that moment of surrender, the darkness glows from within him. This dream captures the essence of integration, the energy you have projected onto others, the intensity you feared, the anger you suppressed, the selfishness you condemned, All of it is waiting to return as vitality. The empath who welcomes this energy becomes radiant. Their light no longer comes from pleasing, but from being. Shadow work is the art of remembering your totality. To do this, you must cultivate what I call active imagination, a dialogue with the unconscious. Sit in silence, breathe, and visualize the feeling that consumes you when you overgive. Give it a form, speak to it, ask it what it needs, not what it wants. The unconscious always answers in images. Perhaps it shows you a neglected garden or a child crying behind a locked door or a goddess chained to a rock. Do not analyze at first. Witness. The image reveals more through presence than through interpretation. Slowly, through this sacred dialogue, you begin to see that the people who drain you are not enemies but messengers. They incarnate the unloved parts of your psyche that are begging to be integrated. When you stop blaming them, you retrieve the fragments of your soul you had scattered through projection, and then something miraculous happens. You no longer enter rooms searching for who needs you. You enter with the quiet knowing that your presence itself is healing. You no longer absorb others' emotions because your soul no longer seeks completion in them. You can feel their pain without becoming it. You can laugh without losing. When the empath reaches this state, they embody what the mystics called compassionate detachment, the ability to stand in love without entanglement. It is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the Christ within who says, "Be healed," not "let me suffer for you." It is the Buddha who sits beneath the tree and radiates peace rather than rescuing every passerby. The journey of shadow work does not end in light, it ends in wholeness. Wholeness includes the light and the dark, the giving and the receiving, the healer and the wounded, the saint and the sinner. When you embrace your own polarity, the compulsion to fix others dissolves. You realize that everyone is already on their path to integration, just as you are. When you have walked long enough through the valley of the shadow, you begin to notice something subtle. The darkness is no longer hostile. It is alive, it listens, it breathes with you. What once terrified you now feels like an ancient companion, whispering truths that daylight could never reveal. This is the moment the alchemists called the dawn within the blackness. The empath who endures this descent without turning away discovers that what they feared was not evil, but their own depth. You see, overgiving is not born from love, it is born from fear disguised as virtue. The empath gives endlessly because they fear abandonment. They merge with others because they fear separation. They anticipate others' needs because they fear being unseen. Yet beneath all these fears lies a wound much older than personality, the archetypal wound of the abandoned child. The soul's memory of being cast out from union with the divine. Every empath unconsciously seeks to return to that lost unity through human connection. Shadow work reveals that the reunion they long for cannot be found in others. for it was never lost, only forgotten within themselves. This realization arrives like thunder and silence together. For the first time, you see that your urge to heal others was your soul's attempt to heal itself. The narcissist you loved was the embodiment of your unacknowledged hunger for validation. The addict you tried to save reflected your own dependence on being needed. The friend who took and took revealed your own refusal to receive. The outer world, once chaotic and unfair, becomes a sacred mirror in which your unconscious dances before your eyes. In the process of individuation, we come to understand that everything we meet outside is also within. The empath, through overgiving, tries to erase the distance between self and other, but individuation demands that we honor that distance, not as separation, but as sacred space where true relationship can exist. Without differentiation, there is no love, only fusion. Without boundaries, there is no empathy, only psychic contagion. The world tells you that love is merging, but the psyche knows that love is meeting a recognition between two individuated souls who no longer need to devour each other to feel whole. To love from wholeness is to bless the other's freedom, even if it means letting them walk away. To love from lack is to cling, to fix, to sacrifice. This is why so many empaths suffer. They confuse caretaking with connection. And in doing so, they chain their own soul to the illusion of saving. Shadow work teaches a higher form of love. The love that does not rescue, but witnesses. This love does not promise safety, it promises truth. It does not seek to comfort at the expense of consciousness. It sees clearly that suffering is not an error, but a teacher. And so the mature empath no longer says, "Let me carry your burden, but I will walk beside you while you learn to carry it." When the empath stops trying to be the savior, they begin to embody what I have called the self, the totality of the psyche that transcends opposites. The self does not overgive because it knows that life moves through all beings in perfect balance. The self does not fear pain because it understands pain as a gateway to transformation. The self is neither rescuing nor retreating. It simply is. From this center, empathy becomes radiant, awareness, warm, present, but untouched by chaos. You might notice that as you become whole, some relationships crumble. Those built on unconscious contracts will resist your transformation. The ones who fed on your overgiving will accuse you of selfishness, for your light is no longer free to consume. Do not despair. Every ending born from authenticity is an initiation. The loneliness you feel is sacred space, opening for new forms of connection rooted in truth. A patient once told me, "Since I set boundaries, everyone says I've changed." I said, "Indeed, you have stopped being a reflection and become a being. When you stop reflecting others' pain, you start radiating your essence." The empath who integrates their shadow becomes magnetically calm. They no longer seek attention. Their stillness draws it naturally. This is the paradox of individuation. When you cease to perform goodness, you become truly good. The alchemists called this stage albedo, the whitening when the light returns, purified after the blackening of the soul. You have met your demons and discovered they were angels in disguise. You have faced your anger and found courage beneath it. You have faced your grief and found compassion within it. You have faced your loneliness and found God sitting quietly at its center. In this whitened state, empathy is no longer reactive but creative. You can listen without absorbing. You can sense without drowning. You can care without carrying. Your energy becomes crystalline, clear, like a mountain stream that reflects the sky but remains its own water. This clarity is the end of emotional overgiving. It is not the end of love, it is the beginning of true love. Love that flows from the self, not from fear. You are no longer the healer who bleeds for others. You are the vessel through which divine compassion moves effortlessly. The work now is not to protect your energy, but to honor it as sacred. You do not need walls, you need awareness. Awareness is the only boundary the soul requires. As you live from this awareness, your perception of suffering changes. You no longer rush to stop others' pain because you see that pain is the crucible of awakening. You begin to trust the intelligence of their process, just as you have learned to trust your own. You realize that empathy without wisdom creates dependency, but empathy illuminated by consciousness creates freedom. This is why I have said that the shadow, once integrated, becomes your greatest source of light. The energy you once wasted in rescuing now fuels creativity, intuition, and insight. The emotions you once feared now become instruments of perception. Anger transforms into clarity, sadness into depth, sensitivity into power. The empath, once fragile, becomes indestructible, not because they are hard, but because they are whole. To end emotional overgiving is not to end generosity. It is to remove its unconscious motive. The conscious empath gives without expectation because their cup is full. They no longer give to feel worthy. They give because they are worthy. They no longer need to be the light. They have realized they are the vessel through which light moves. Let me leave you with an image. Picture a candle in a vast cathedral. Its flame flickers, not because of weakness, but because of movement. The air itself is alive around it. The candle does not choose whom it illuminates. It simply burns. The empath, who has integrated their shadow, becomes like this candle. They no longer rush into darkness to chase away every shadow. They understand that darkness is necessary for light to have meaning. And so, when you find yourself tempted to overgive, pause, breathe, ask, am I acting from love or from fear? Am I helping them awaken, or am I avoiding my own awakening? Then listen. The soul always answers in silence. That silence is the space where you remember who you are, not the rescuer, not the martyr, not even the empath, but the consciousness behind it all. The journey of shadow work for the empath is the journey from fusion to freedom, from pity to power, from depletion to divine presence. It is the return to yourself, the part of you that was never broken, never dependent, never lost. When you live from that place, every act of love is effortless. Every boundary is natural, and every moment becomes sacred. The overgiving ends not because you learned to close your heart, but because you finally remembered that your heart was never meant to be a sacrifice. It was meant to be a sanctuary. You might think the work is done when you reach this point of peace, when you finally stop overgiving, when the heart beats quietly and no longer aches to be needed, but the psyche moves in spirals, not lines. What was once integrated will ask to be deepened, for consciousness expands like a living flame, illuminating one layer of shadow only to reveal another beneath it. So do not be surprised when life presents you again with those same old patterns in new disguises, another person to rescue, another cry for help that feels like a divine summons. These are not setbacks, they are invitations to refine your awareness every time you recognize the old impulse, but choose differently. The unconscious bows in reverence, for in that moment, the child in you, the one who once believed love required sacrifice, sees that love and pain no longer walk hand in hand. You will notice, too, that your empathy changes texture. Before, it was porous and reactive, like a sponge soaking up every vibration around you. Now it is luminous and discerning, like stained glass, through which light passes but does not destroy. You sense others' emotions, but you no longer confuse them with your own. You no longer rush to interpret every sadness as your duty or every silence as rejection. You begin to sense that energy is not yours to control, but to witness. This witnessing is the final form of empathy, not emotional fusion, but spiritual seeing. It is what I meant when I said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The empath who has faced their shadow no longer calls suffering fate. They call it revelation. They understand that each experience is the psyche's attempt to restore wholeness through awareness. In your new clarity, you will feel both stronger and softer. The strength comes from having boundaries that are no longer defenses but definitions. The softness comes from realizing that everyone, even those who once drained you, are carrying their own unintegrated shadows. You see the narcissist now, not as an enemy, but as a soul lost in its own inflation, terrified of its inner emptiness. You see the victim not as a burden, but as someone still learning to claim their agency. Compassion remains, but attachment dissolve. The ego resists this freedom. It misses the drama of giving too much, of being the savior, the rescuer, the one who feels everything. It misses the importance that overgiving once brought. You must forgive your ego for this. It was only trying to belong, But belonging now means something different. It no longer means merging, it means standing in truth. The truth is simple and difficult. You are not responsible for anyone's transformation. You can only embody your own, and in embodying it, you become a catalyst, not through effort, but through presence. Your very being begins to rearrange the energy of every room you enter. The unconscious of others senses your wholeness and either rises to meet it or recoils from it. Both responses are sacred. Some will be drawn to your peace. Others will project their disowned chaos onto you. The difference now is that you no longer internalize their projections, you let them fall to the floor, where the earth itself absorbs and transmutes them. It is at this stage that the empath begins to live mythically again. You no longer interpret your experiences merely as personal, but archetypal. The people in your life become symbols in the ongoing story of your individuation. The overbearing parent becomes a great mother in shadow form, demanding devotion instead of nurturing independence. The manipulative friend becomes the trickster, testing your discernment. The lover who withdraws becomes the anima or animus, the inner counterpart, teaching you about your relationship to desire itself. Once you see these patterns as archetypes, you are freed from the need to moralize. There are no villains now, only mirrors, no punishments, only lessons. You see that every soul plays its part in the great drama of awakening. And with that realization, forgiveness arises naturally, not as sentiment, but as understanding. Yet, even in this illumination, the work continues. The empath must now integrate the shadow of light, the temptation to feel superior in awareness, to withdraw from the messy world in favor of the purity of consciousness. The shadow disguises itself even in enlightenment. To reject the world because it is still asleep is another form of separation, another defense against pain. True individuation does not lead away from humanity, but back into it, with eyes open, heart intact, and feet firmly on the earth. This is the golden stage of alchemy, rubedo, the reddening, when spirit and matter unite, when compassion and boundaries coexist, when love becomes both soft and fierce. You begin to serve, not through rescuing, but through radiance. Your empathy becomes creative. You paint, write, heal, teach, or simply live in a way that restores balance wherever you are. Your very existence becomes a quiet sermon that love without consciousness is bondage, and consciousness without love is emptiness. At this point, life itself becomes your teacher. Every moment invites you to practice presence when someone demands more than you can give. When silence feels uncomfortable, when the old guilt whispers that you should be doing more, in those moments, breathe and remember, your worth was never measured by your usefulness. You do not owe anyone your light, but you can choose to let it shine. The empath who embodies this truth becomes a guardian of energy, not hoarding it, but honoring it. They no longer chase harmony. Their harmony, their empathy becomes like gravity, invisible yet undeniable, drawing others toward their own center of balance. In dreams, this final transformation often appears as a union, a marriage, a child, or a merging of opposites. It symbolizes the birth of the self, the completion of a cycle. You may dream of standing on a mountain at dawn, light rising from both horizons, and within you, that is the psyche's way of saying, the light and the dark have finally met. When the empath reaches this level of integration, their life ceases to revolve around pain. They still feel deeply, but they no longer suffer needlessly. They still care, but they do not collapse. They can sit beside another's grief without drowning, for they have learned the sacred art of staying anchored in their own depths. And so, dear one, the practice that ends emotional overgiving is not withdrawal, but awakening. It is remembering that love was never meant to cost your soul. It is knowing that the shadow you once feared was never your enemy, but your forgotten teacher. It is realizing that empathy was never about absorbing pain, it was about seeing it, and through seeing, transforming it into wisdom. The shadow is the womb of your power. The empath who enters it with courage will emerge not as a savior, but as a creator no longer bound by the suffering of others, but capable of transmuting it into light. This is the true meaning of healing, not to remove darkness, but to illuminate it from within. You were never meant to save the world by carrying it. You were meant to awaken within it, to let your awareness become the quiet fire that shows others the way back to themselves. The empath who has faced their shadow does not stand above humanity, but among it, eyes open, heart blazing, finally free to give, not from fear, not from need, but from fullness. And when you live from that fullness, you will understand. The shadow was never separate from the light. They were two hands of the same soul, clasped in prayer, waiting all along for you to open your eyes and say, I see you. I am you. I am whole